Hi everyone, I am back. Sorry to anybody that subscribes because I know it's been well over a year since our last video, but I have been a little bit preoccupied with pregnancies and then welcoming this little one into the world, which is why I've had no new content. But we are back. We will still be a bit intermittent, so bear with us, but I thought I would use this as an opportunity to do a new video because over the last year I have let the dogs go pretty rogue, and so now I'm starting to get back into things, and we just nearly need to brush up on the foundations and see where we are at with our behaviours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get Ivy out and we're going to do a bit of a grid work session. Now grids are something that I was introduced to through Colette May in Completely Gundogs over in Wales. She's the one that hosts the Gundog holidays, which are fabulous. As a side note, if anybody wants to get in touch with her, I do have a video on the holiday that we attended somewhere, so I will share a link to that. But it just is a nice way to structure your session. It allows you to practice all sorts of different cues and behaviours, and so we're going to use that to see where we're at the moment, what our baseline is, and that's going to help us know what we need to focus on in the coming weeks. So let's give it a go with a baby in tow and see how we get on. So we started this session by doing some circuits. Now the idea of circuits is that it allows the dog to settle into the environment without putting any pressure on them before you start training. So when I start out with my circuits, I'm not asking Ivy to do anything. I've not given her any cues. I just start to slowly walk between the two marker posts, covering the same ground as we go back and forth. And I'm giving her the time to settle into the environment, to have a look around, to sniff the ground. The only rules are that she can't drag me. Then after a couple of repetitions, Ivy starts to connect a bit more with me. So signs that she's doing that are that she's starting to walk with me, she's starting to turn the corners around the marker posts with me, she's looking up at me and checking in. And so that is what I'm looking to start happening when I'm doing circuits. And as she offers me those behaviours, I then start to reward them. Then when I feel like she is connected with me, I then start to add in a couple of cues just to double check. In this example, I used my sit cue. She responded nicely, and so that told me that she's ready to work and begin the session. Circuits were originally introduced to me through the Gundog Trainers Academy, and they are a really nice way to start any training session. They're also really useful if you are in a situation where your dog's slightly over-aroused and you need to settle them down before then asking them to do something, maybe out on a shoot day or potentially before a test or something like that. So they're a really nice thing to have in your training toolkit. Then when I felt that she was ready, I took the lead off and started the actual training session. So we started out with some heel work, so I gave her the heel cue and then set off. We initially started by covering the ground that we'd already covered during our circuits, and then I started to venture out around my training grid. Personally, I don't particularly enjoy training heel work. However, I have found that I have a bit more focus and structure when I am training using the grid system, so that's something to consider. Now Ivy's heel work isn't particularly precise, and I'm not overly fussed by that. I'm not looking for super tight heel work, but I have made a note that it is something that we could potentially look to work on going forward. But really you just need to set the criteria for your dog and what you want it to be, and then work to that standard. But as we're going round, she's staying with me, she's connected, she's checking in, and I'm rewarding as we go. Then I started to add some sit stays into our grid. So pop her in a sit and then walk away. Then I was walking around and you'll notice that she gets up from the sit into a stand. She doesn't break and come forward, but I just stop and re-cue the sit because that's the behaviour that I had asked for. I then continue with the stay exercise and then return back to her and reward. We then pick her back up and do some more heel work around the grid before popping her in another sit stay, and then this time I look to recall her out of that position. Just as a bit of a side note, you can set up the grid however you want. So in this session I'm using a 6-point grid, but you can do 4, 6, 8, 10, however many you want, just depending on what works for you and the space that you've got available. I then get to the point on the grid where I want to recall her from. I turn around and I pause briefly to make sure that she's not coming back to me just because I've stopped. I then blow the whistle and you can see that she comes charging back. So I then reward her, and in this instance I chose to reward her by throwing some food around for her to chase after and find. And then I let her have a bit of a break. And I did note that she didn't have much structure to the end of that recall behaviour, so that's something that we will look to tidy up over the coming weeks. So then after a little break, we then resumed and we started out by doing another recall, but this time with a distraction. So with Ivy sat by my side, I throw the dummy out, so we've got a bit of steadiness there. I then ask her to remain in place and I walk away. Then when I've reached my point on the grid, I then turn around and recall her and she comes charging back to me. Then we have a little play as a reward. So then the next exercise, I'm going to throw a dummy out to the post that she was just at, and then I'm going to line her for the distraction dummy from the previous exercise. So using the grid now to work on our lining skills and our memory skills. So she does that beautifully. A nice keen run out, a clean pick up and a direct return and delivery to hand. You may notice that throughout the training session she does jump up at me quite a bit. However, that isn't a behaviour that I'm worried about. It really doesn't bother me, and so it's not something that I'm doing anything to fix. However, obviously, if that's a behaviour that you don't want your dog to be displaying, then of course you can do training to help prevent it. Again, it's one of those situations where you set the criteria for your dog and what you want them to be doing. So for me, she only really does it in the context of training, and therefore that's why I'm not fussed about it. Then we moved on and started adding in some directional work into the grid session. So I've thrown a dummy out there, but I didn't throw it far enough, so I went out and repositioned it. So again, practicing some more sit, stay and steadiness. I then heel her out to the middle post, turn around, pop her in a sit, and then I walk away from her. So again, practicing some more behaviours as part of the overall exercise. I then turn and face her and I blow my stop whistle and just pause briefly to make sure she's staying put, and then using my left arm I cast her towards the dummy, which is now a memory because that's been down for a little while. She again runs out beautifully, picks it and returns and delivers to hand. So that is all working really nicely and she gets a little reward for that. I've cut out the heel work as it's a bit boring to watch, but this time I'm setting up another directional exercise but placing it as a blind. So I've just dropped the dummy there while she was heeling, so she didn't see it go down. We then heel back, I pop her in a sit, and then I walk away. So this time I'm increasing the distance between me and her, but the distance between her and the marker post is the same, and because there's a marker post it is an easier blind for her. So I then cast her out, and you can see that she charges straight out to the post, finds the dummy, and then comes charging back to deliver. So those casts are working well. So again, I reward her, and then I released her for another little training break before then setting up the next exercise. So in this setup, I'm going to work on the back cast with her, but in doing so, I'm also practicing other behaviours. So I pop her in a sit, walk out and throw the dummy. So she does some sit stays with steadiness with the distraction of dummy going out. I then walk back to her and then pick her up and we heel towards the dummy. So heel work with some distractions out, then turn her around, pop her in a sit again and walk away before blowing the stop whistle and then casting her back onto that dummy. Then I faffed about for a while trying to work out what to do next. So cut to once I'd finally made a decision. So I popped her in a sit and I throw a dummy out towards my game bag and then walk to one of the marker posts. I then turn and face her and recall her towards me. I reward her for the recall and then I line her towards the dummy. I then stop her on her way, so using stop whistle in the presence of the distraction being that she is committed to the dummy at that point in time, and then I call her back in and give her a big reward with the tennis ball because that was really nice. Then once I'd collected her back in, we changed the exercise slightly, so I line and send her towards the white marker post in front of me as if it was a blind. I then stop her on her way and then cast her out to the dummy by my game bag. So she had a slightly messy return with a little drop there, but otherwise that was really nicely done. And then the final cue that I decided to add into our grid session was our hunt there cue. So I popped her in a sit, walked away, and I've sprinkled some food down by that white post as I'm walking. Not obviously though. I then return to her and line and send her to the post. I then stop her at the post, but this time I then use my hunt there whistle, and then she hunts, finds the food. Then once she'd found the food, I recalled her back in and rewarded her with a throw of the tennis ball and just let her have a play, as that was the end of the session for us. So hopefully that's shown you how you can incorporate a grid into your training sessions if you want to, and shown how you can use it to practice so many different behaviours. As in this session, we've shown heel work, sits, stays, recalls, stop whistles, various different retrieves with memories, blinds, marked, lining, casting, as well as the hunt there whistle. So loads and loads that we've crammed in. You obviously don't need to do quite as much as that in one session, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of inspiration. And then you just play about with the difficulty factors to suit you and your dog. As I said at the beginning of this video, I was using this training session to get a bit of a baseline to see where Ivy was at with her different behaviours. So my takeaways are that the obedient stuff could do with a little bit of tidying up, so the heel work, the end of her recall, her retrieves were all working really nicely, as was her stop whistle. So we'll just look at ramping up the difficulty levels with those behaviours over the coming weeks. So that's everything for today, but as always, if you have any tips, any questions or any advice, please feel free to pop them in the comments below, and thanks for watching.